Hi, welcome to Health Beat. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Barry Hobbs with Hobbs Specific Chiropractic in Livonia, Michigan. And with me today is
Dr. Christopher Bennett with Orion Family Spinal Center.
Last episode, we were talking about sports and chiropractic, from the amateur athlete to the professional athletes. And today we're going to talk about that as well, but also get into more of the details, such as a hot topic called concussions. It's been around for the last decade. It's really been more prevalent in the media, from the heading of the soccer ball with the kids and seeing challenges and symptoms with that, to even recently a movie being made on concussions and the seriousness of these ex-pro typical football players that are committing suicide and having all these health problems due to concussions, trauma to the brain and spine.
Right, and it's actually, as far as the concussions go, it's actually changing the landscape of the way sports are played now too. I mean, you're seeing rules happening that weren't there several years ago. I mean, you're talking about how they're protecting the quarterbacks more with some of these different rules. And now in college football, the targeting. When they go in, when it looks like they were going for the head, actually getting kicked out of the rest of the game.
Yeah.
So it's changing the landscape of sports and how sports are being played. And with between the rules and all that type of thing. So it's obviously a huge topic. And some of the things we want to talk about today was one, like in other words, what does a concussion look like, and how do you know what a concussion is? What are some symptoms of concussion, and some of the other things that happen along with concussion that most people are probably unaware of, that needs to be addressed because it is a huge component of the damage that's done when the concussion takes place.
Absolutely. And a concussion can occur even from a simple fall in the kitchen, right, or in the bathroom, which is where most of the injuries and trauma occurs, is in the house, not only on the sports field or playing field, but also I had a parent who had a concussion from being at her son's soccer game, and the soccer ball came up and hit on top of her head, and she ended up having a concussion. And like Dr. Bennett was saying, there's a whole new protocol now of the way that the game is played, the rules that are in place to prevent these, the equipment, the protocol of intramural, even grade school, even professional, of cutting that player out, including boxing and kickboxing as well, because of the seriousness of the effects of this injury to this very important part of our body, which you and I work with every day, is the brain and spinal cord.
Right, and again, like you said, the rule changes. I mean, I was just recently at an event where they were talking about soccer, and you mentioned that earlier. Kids now, like when I was in school, it was perfectly legal move to head a soccer ball. Now it's completely an illegal move. All the way up through high school soccer, and I don't know if the collegiate level, if they're allowed to do that or not, but I know that all the way up through high school, it's illegal for them to head the ball because of that. I mean, that's a rule that didn't even exist 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So what is a concussion, and what is that, what is a concussion, Dr. Hobbs?
A concussion is the jolting of the brain inside the skull, and if you think about this important system of ours, the central nervous system, which we work with every day, and as upper cervical chiropractors, we analyze it every day with our instrumentation, is the brain is protected by bone, the skull. It is the only organ completely encapsulated by bone and protective. So therefore, biologically, development-wise, it's important. And then it becomes the spinal cord, which is encased inside a vertebral column, which has movable segments, which we adjust with the subluxations. And the definition of subluxation that we give is different than a subluxation from an MRI or CAT scan you may get if you're suspected to have a concussion medically as well. The definitions are different. So the common side effects would be loss of vision, blurriness, dizziness, improper speech, disorientation. There's many symptoms. We're going to put up on the screen here some common concussion symptoms as well.
And some other ones that people don't realize too is there's emotional symptoms. I have a list here. Emotional symptoms. So moody, irritable, and worried a lot. Sleep issues, drowsiness, trouble falling asleep, difficulty with concentrating on things. And there's also some neurological things there but the parent wouldn't really know to look for those neurological things. But as far as the way the pupils dilate, all those types of things. But yeah, the concussion is basically when that brain is moved around in such a way that it's actually hit up against the skull and done some bruising or caused some damage there. Not permanent necessarily, but caused some damage there to the brain. And I was actually looking recently at because we tend to think about football, right? That's the big one. We think about football and that being the mode of injury for concussions, as you alluded to. Not always. It doesn't have to be some massive football hit to get a concussion. It could be, I was recently talking to a parent that their kid had fallen on the playground, fallen at school and kind of hit their head up against the wall and got a mild concussion. There's different varying degrees of these concussions. There's different methods for how they happen. And it's really, all it amounts to is, was there a force strong enough in the body that could have caused it? And so according to neuropsychologists, 95 G's of force is enough to cause a concussion, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. But a football hit can generally generate around 100 G's of force. So, a football hit can definitely cause a concussion easily, along with car accidents. It can be anything that can cause it. But here's the interesting thing, is it only takes 5 to 7 G's of force in the body to create a cervical spinal cord or cervical spinal injury. In other words, like a whiplash or any type of injury to the spine, to the cervical spine. Yeah. So, as we know, the intimate relationship of the cervical spine with the nervous system, the cerebral spinal fluid flow that flows around the spine, up into the brain, and is responsible for bringing nutrients into the brain, taking toxins out of the brain. Because guess what? Every cell in the body, when it goes through its normal state of metabolism, it releases byproducts. Just like when we eat, right? We release byproducts, right? And so the cells do too, and it has to get out of there.
Right, and what happens in the concussion when that brain is jolted around inside that ball of bone? It'll have a swelling effect. And just like we were talking about, the concussion symptoms are different on two individuals. It really depends on the method, the mode of where that force was, and then what area of that brain that hit along that skull. Was it the area of emotions? Was it the area of appetite? Was it the area of eyesight? Was it the area of feelings? Was it the area of memory? So you'll see different symptoms and effects of individuals according to the way that that injury was sustained, of however that injury occurred. And many times we'll see individuals after the concussion took place, many times days, weeks, months later, and we'll get into that our next segment after the break. We want to thank you for being here on Health Beat. We'll see you soon.
Hi, and welcome back to Health Beat. I'm Dr. Chris Bennett with Orient Family Spinal Center. With me is Dr. Barry Hobbs.
With Hobbs Specific Chiropractic in Livonia, Michigan.
So before the last break, I said we want to talk about how having a subluxation, which again, for our viewers who don't know what subluxation is, maybe this is the first episode you've chimed in on. But what a subluxation is basically when one of the bones in the spine misaligns. Now, just misaligning by itself is not a subluxation. It's when it misaligns and actually causes neurological interference. And we measure that neurological interference using thermographic analysis or infrared, because when that shifts out, it causes the nerves to become irritated and inflamed, causing it to become hotter on one side than the other. And we'll start seeing breaks, or in other words, deflections and heat becoming hotter more on one side than the other. And that's a clue that there's a subluxation there. It's not the be-all end-all, but it's a clue. The be-all end-all is when we start seeing the same graph or same reading, same interference showing up repeatedly. That means that it's an actual issue there that needs to be corrected. So that's the definition of subluxation. So how does subluxation impact your structure and ultimately the function of your body? So that's a great question. I'm going to stand up to illustrate that. So when we've got subluxation present, because the head sits on top of these two bones up here, if those bones shift out of position, the head doesn't have a choice, it has to go with it. And so we don't really function well with our head cocked to one side or shifted to one side. So the brain actually will compensate for that by dropping a shoulder, raising a hip, sometimes twisting our bodies around, trying to make all the neurological centers in our brain, the eyes, the ears, all the balance centers in the middle of the ear and the cerebellum and all that stuff to level with the horizon. Well, once you've altered that, think about it from a standpoint of a functional standpoint. If you're a golfer or you're a baseball player, let's say you're a baseball player and you need to turn on a pitch, if your body's already shifted partially against the way you need to swing, then you're going to have a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted motion as you go through and carry through for that swing. So that's going to affect your reaction time. That's going to affect how well you react to a fastball. It's going to affect your balance in your golf swing. I had a patient that started with us, and one of the things he said he had noticed not long after being under care was that he began to hit the ball farther in his golf swing, and being more on balance with it. So when he carried through his swing, he was hitting it straighter and farther because he didn't feel off balance.
Right.
And so that's a huge part of it, right? About the mechanical and the movement that takes place, especially when you're talking about sports.
Right. And what typically happens neurologically when the brain comes into the spinal cord, the first area of interference, like Dr. Bennett was talking about, was the atlas, the top bone. The skull sits on top of that top bone, which is only 2 to 4 ounces. The skull can be 10 to 14 pounds. The only thing that holds that complex, that joint together, are muscles and ligaments. That's it. That head can theoretically spin 360 degrees on that. We're going to talk about concussions and other sports injuries, sprains, strains, whiplash accidents down the road that talks about the difficulty and the complexness of that. But what happens is when you have that kink, the brain and spinal cord doesn't necessarily feel that, so it'll naturally twist and turn, like Dr. Bennett was illustrating, to take that pressure off. And it's similar to a big rock or boulder going inside a river or a stream. That flow needs to happen. It's laws of physics. And so what will happen is that stream will then twist and turn to counterbalance that weight of gravity and pull the water back to the equator. Same thing with the spinal cord and the spinal fluid. The way that it flows is whenever there's a kink, you'll see changes on MRIs. You'll see changes in x-rays of somebody who has scoliosis. And classically in our scoliosis patients, when we see them with an x-ray and they have the curvature of the spine called scoliosis, we'll ask them, did you have an injury when you were little? And classically, literally the majority of individuals will say, yeah, I fell off the swing set when I was little. My mom and dad said I wasn't the same person for a couple of days. I had to be bedridden, but I was okay, or I was checked out at the hospital. And that initial jolt, that trauma to the head and neck, made the spine twist and turn and alter the biomechanics, which then affects us later on in life when we're trying to do something that we enjoy, such as golf, or when we're trying to do something such as performance, being a quarterback, being a baseball player, even being a parent to a living person.
Right. And one thing I want to point out about that, I'm glad you brought that up, is they were evaluated at the hospital and they were checked out saying nothing was wrong. Now, here's one thing I want to point out is that the doctors didn't miss anything, okay? It's not like they missed something.
Correct.
All right? They just look for different things. It's like if I took an x-ray of a patient and I put it up, and one of the things I'm going to see is on there is that, I'm going to look for that misalignment because that's what I'm trained to look for. Now, if you took that same x-ray and put it up for a dentist, they're going to start going, oh my gosh, look, they've had a cavity there, they've had a crown there, they've had these different things, a root canal. They're seeing different things because their eyes are trained to look for different things. So when a medical doctor is looking for, especially in an ER situation, they're looking for, is this an emergency? Is there a break?
Fractures.
Is there a fracture? Is there a dislocation?
Yes.
Is there a spinal cord injury, like not just an interference, but an actual severing of the spinal cord or a major thing right there that needs emergency medical attention?
Right.
So in their eyes, by their checklist, they're correct.
Correct.
There was nothing wrong.
Right.
Right? But we're looking more at the function of the nervous system and not so much the structure of the mechanics of the spine, or not the mechanics, but the structural integrity of the spine. You know, in other words, was there a break or not? We're not looking for that.
Right, and they go hand in hand.
I mean, we are, but that's not, that's what they're looking for when they do that.
Right, they typically have already been to the emergency room first, got checked out, and like Dr. Bennett was saying, it's their viewpoint of the way they're trained, because we'll pull up x-rays all the time and there'll be a reverse curve where it's supposed to look like this, it's this. And the patients sometimes will ask us, well, Dr. Hobbs, why didn't they catch that? And it's an easy answer. They're not trained to look at that, but we are. And what are the effects of a reverse curve, of a reverse spine, or a kink of that bone being reversed, putting pressure on the spinal cord? And typically, the majority of times, they'll have neurological problems, electrical problems, symptoms of that area of where those electrical wires exit the spine and go to that body. So it's just a matter of training. It's not who's right, who's wrong. Right. It's a matter of perspective.
Right. It's a matter of what we're looking for versus what they're looking for, and we're trained to look for different things.
Absolutely.
And they're both legitimate. They're both what we want to look for. So we're going to actually go on and take a break here and come back for our next segment. So thank you for joining us on Health Beat.
Hi, welcome back to Health Beat. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Barry Hobbs with Hobbs Specific Chiropractic in Livonia, Michigan. And with me is Dr.
Chris Bennett from Orient Family Spinal Center.
So on the last couple of episodes on today's show, we were talking about sports and athletics. We're talking about biomechanics and structure. And one of the common things that individuals come into our office for is musculoskeletal problems. And one of the key distinctions us chiropractors are trained in is balance, posture. And the main reason why we look at the balance and posture in the spine is actually the central nervous system inside, the powerhouse that's controlling our entire function of our body. Brain, spinal cord control everything. It's housed inside the spine. So whenever individuals come in, this is a classic case that I see often with weight trainers, personal trainers. As Dr. Bennett was talking about the biomechanics, somebody may come in and have a complete right low shoulder or a head tilt, and many times they'll think, I need to work that out more. Now, I've had these personal trainers that are amazing, dedicated individuals that spend 2, 3, 4 hours, it's literally a part-time job, in the gym training, and I'll ask them, do you really think it's because that muscle is weak? You've been training this forever, been exercising it, strength training. It's not the muscle, it's not the weakness, it's the way that it's attached to those bones. So whenever there's a side that's stretched, such as the right trap in this episode that I'm demonstrating, that muscle is always going to be tight because it's elongated because of the structure that it's connected to. So I often run into this with personal trainers or the personal trainers or physical therapists who will tell their patients, you need to re-strengthen the core, you need to re-strengthen your muscles. That's true. The key to re-strengthening this is to get the power open from the brain to body, and more importantly, get that structure so those muscles are balanced then, not imbalanced, not one is short and one is long. And I know you see this all the time in the office as well.
Yeah, actually, one of the cases I had not too long ago was a guy who was a power lifter, and he loved to power lift. And he actually, it's an interesting thing, because you see this happen sometimes with cases. So he started care, and not long after starting care, he's like, I was like, how things going? He goes, you know what, I'm actually hitting my personal best with lifting. He goes, I'm hitting numbers I've never hit before. And you have to think, why is that? Well, when you think about from a mechanical structure and a standpoint of muscle balance, a lot of powerlifting is not about brute force. I mean, it is about you gotta be strong, but it's also about the precision with which the movement is taking place. So a lot of those guys who are professional powerlifters, they actually film their lifts to see, are they going at the right angles? Are they doing these things that give them the best advantage to lift the most weight? And being in balance was making a difference, and it was actually giving him his best lifts. And he actually went on to, but he left care for a little bit, right? And started to go backwards, and it was just kind of circumstantial, work, things like that. But he started going backwards a little bit, and then he came back in, and then he actually got back on track and started hitting his personal best and went on to actually compete in national competition.
That's great. One of the key things that I say, the thing that I say when every patient leaves the office is, your power's on. It's not, are you feeling better? It's your power's on, because we have the instrumentation that measures the communication link between the brain and body and that nerve firing to those muscles. For example, telling that power lifter to lift. You made me think of 2 cases that we had this year come into my office. It happened to be, the first case was about a mid 40-year-old male that was losing his pec muscle. His chest was losing it. It actually was disintegrating, getting smaller. And he had tried everything. He lifts weights, and he actually spent more time doing different dumbbell presses, chest presses, nutrition, stimulation, physical therapy to regain that muscle. And I simply talked to him. I said, hey, Mr. Smith, did you ever try chiropractic? Well, it's not about my back. I said, of course, it's not about your back. It's about the power to your muscle. Your muscle is disintegrating for some reason. It's not getting power supply. You're doing all these wonderful other healthy things, but you're not trying to incorporate chiropractic and reestablishing that communicating link between brain and your right pec. And so I challenged him to come in. Now, what's interesting is Within a couple of weeks, another family had called me and wanted their 15-year-old boy to come in. And I had asked them what had happened. I had seen him when he was a little boy at 2 to 4 years old for bedwetting problems that had went away. They went away. So here he is, 14, 15 now. I forget what age he is. And he's taking selfies. And of course, he's a lifeguard. So he is very aware of his physique. He coincidentally was losing mass in his right pec muscle. And it affected him in the way he was being with the selfies and lifeguard and lifting weights. And he felt horrible, he felt bad, he thought he was doing something wrong. His parent is a nurse and said, hey, Dr. Hobbs always talks about the nerve muscle reestablishing and regrowing. Sure enough, he came into the office within a couple of weeks of this male, and I will say that both of them have reestablished their muscle growth, and literally it's symmetrical now. And the 14, 15-year-old, it's funny, after an exam and getting his subluxations corrected, he'll actually take off his shirt and show off his pecs and how balanced they are. And there's no money in the world that could pay for that. We reestablished that connection between his brain and his pec, and now he's more balanced, he feels more secure in himself, and then his performance as a lifeguard and swimming has increased as well.
Right. And believe me, the one thing you want is if you're in a drowning situation, you want a lifeguard with quick reflexes.
Correct. Not just a
you don't want
one-sided
one You don't want one that's a little bit, I definitely don't want a subluxated lifeguard.
Correct.
That's for sure.
Correct. Good news is he'd be able to swim better on one side than
Right,
another.
yeah,
but
that's
now he can actually hold on to you and paddle with the other hand.
Right,
so absolutely, these things that we see, these cases that we see with sports, and we're, as you know, we were not just talking about the major athletic teams and professional athletes. We're talking, even if you run 1 mile a day or you get on the treadmill for 10 minutes, you theoretically are doing sports and activities. And we as chiropractors are here to help improve your performance and your function and make sure that it's firing and functioning well, so you'll always feel better.
Right, that's awesome. Well, one thing I want to end on, and as we conclude this episode, is that it's not about treating these things. That's not what we're doing. So I don't treat powerlifters. So if a person came in to see me, I'm not going to turn someone who's not a powerlifter into a powerlifter. That's not what I do. I don't treat people. I don't even treat back pain and neck pain type of stuff. I mean, I don't really treat that stuff. What I do and what we do is we simply work with the body's own innate ability to heal itself, because it's actually designed to heal itself. It's actually designed and pre-programmed from the time of conception to be 100% healthy and functioning and expressing itself optimally. And all we do is we help it to return to that state by freeing up the things that's causing it to not express itself optimally.
Absolutely.
So I want to wrap up, and I want to thank you for being here again. It's always fun to sit down and have these talks, and thank you for being and tuning into Health Beat. And we'll see you at our next episode. Thanks and have a great day.